All right. All right, ready? All right, so this is basically version one or take one of experimental design versus scientific method. So you guys know what scientific method is. You both grew up with scientific method. If you don't remember it, it's over there on the screen. It says to observe, ask questions, form a hypothesis, investigate, research, plan and conduct an experiment, collect and record your results, and then draw a conclusion, and then communicate those results. So all of you have done this. If you've ever seen a bird nest in the woods and looked at that bird nest, you probably knew that it wasn't an elephant that made that bird nest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how did you know that it wasn't an elephant? Because birds make nests, right? So do elephants lay eggs? So, I mean, not saying that you might find some place where an elephant and a bunch of elephants as a herd lay down and have an area wallowed down or something like that, but they're not going and collecting sticks and with their trunks and dragging them around and building a little nest so they can lay in it and then have an egg and then sit around and nurture that egg, right? So you knew that. So by the fact that you have seen a squirrel digging in the forest, what is the squirrel doing?
Looking for food.
Looking for food, right? Looking for those nuts or whatever, those pecans, those acorns, whatever, so they can bury it for the winter and have stores for the winter when it gets cold, when it has to really go in and stay warm. So you know what that is. So without actually realizing it, you're using the scientific method by everything that you investigate in nature. So when we investigate something in nature that happens naturally, like clouds in the sky or rainbows, that's called a phenomenon. And you are using the scientific method to determine what created this or what caused this. All right. So you've asked that question. You're like, okay, I think it's this. Like for the bird nest, you're like, I think that's a robin nest, right? And how could you determine if it were an actual robin nest? What could you do, Jackson? Wait for the bird to come back. So that might sound like waiting for paint to dry, boring, but there's ornithologists out there that watch birds all day long, and they record the mannerisms, they record their feeding habits, their mating habits, their lifespan, everything. So if I thought it was a robin's nest and I sat around waiting for a robin to return and it shows up to be a sparrow or a blue jay or something like that, then you have to redefine your understanding of what made that nest, right? So maybe you're looking at size differences. Oh, well, this is this, you know. So you formed a hypothesis and then you investigate. You actually start to formulate a way to determine the answer, and the answer is going to support what you thought or not. So you draw a conclusion, you collect your data, and then you communicate those results. So that's basically the scientific method, and each one of us have done that without realizing we've done it. Now, experimental design is a little different. You've done experimental design, but you may not have realized you've done experimental design. And so I'll give you an idea. So if we had this room right here has a bunch of chairs and tables set up, right? So if this room was an apartment complex, and that apartment complex was built in the 70s and had the potential to have COVID, or not COVID, so sorry, I'm on a COVID kick, I guess, thinking about COVID. If it had asbestos back in the 70s, and your apartment owner said, hey, you're the maintenance guy, I need you to go and I want you to test all 100 apartments for the presence of asbestos. Now that'd take you a while, right? So is there a way that you could do the test on the apartments but not check all 100 apartments? What could you do differently? That's a sample size, so I'm saying it's 100. So could we have a smaller sample size?
Mm-hmm.
Like what would be an acceptable sample size that you could test and still get a good idea if all 100 apartments had asbestos in it? What do you think is a good acceptable range?
Like if you test half of them and all of
Carly
them.
Martinez, can you come to the office, please? Carly Martinez, come to the office.
sorry about our public service announcement.
If you just tested like 50% of them, and all of those had them, then you could probably estimate that all the
Okay.
rest of them.
So he said 50%. So that's a very good estimate. I could say you could even go less.
Mhm.
Let's say you test 10%. So let's say out of that 100 apartments, I don't want to collect 10 apartments from one side. I'd want to collect randomly 10 apartments, right? Or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, whatever. But I'm trying to stay away from that 100. But if I say I'm going to test this one, I'm going to test this one, I'm going to test this one, this one, this one, this one, 10 of them, and I'm going to check them for asbestos. Now, if I check all 10 and a majority or even 100% of that 10% had asbestos in it, what could you infer? What could you say about all of the other 90?
That they most likely have.
That they most likely. Now, is it a fact?
No.
No, because you didn't test all 100. So it's a theory, right? So it can't be a law, which a law is something that's it's usually definite. Not saying that it can not change, but it's more like a theory. You didn't test 100 of them. You tested 10 of them, or 25 or 30. But you didn't test the original 100 that the owner wanted you to. But you still got an idea that, out of these sample size, I sampled all these groups, and out of that group, 100% of them were asbestos. So I could infer, I can make a leap, and say that the rest of them probably do. Same way with COVID. If I wanted to go and test.
All right, 7:55, so it's the first bell. So everybody have a good Tuesday.
All right, sorry about the second public service announcement there. But we're in New York City. There's 13 million people in New York City. If I said, I need you to go and check the population of New York for COVID, would that be an impossible task? Probably.
Yeah.
Test every single person. That means I have to have 13 million test kits on hand. And some of the test kits might be bad. Some of them are going to be, false tests or whatever, and you might need more than that. So we could test pockets of people just like we did pockets of the apartments, right? So I could say, okay, I need you to go to the Bronx. I need you to go over to Queens. I need you to go over to Chinatown. It's on my throat. Sorry, Chinatown. I need you to go over South Manhattan or whatever, Staten Island area, all this stuff. I want you to sample 10,000 people total in each group. All right. So you're talking about now 50, 60,000 people that you're checking, which is a little bit more feasible. And then if your sample in that one area gets a good amount of people, then you could say that group probably needs to be further tested. But if you had this, say I was testing 10,000 and I only got 1,000 people out of that 10,000, then that's a low number still, right? So my point is that you don't have to test everybody to get a good idea what the population overall would be like, or even what they would vote like, or what they would, so you can use this experimental design several different ways. So I can use sample sizes. Inside science, we have different terms. Experimental design, we have independent variable, dependent variable, controls, and constants. I know you've heard me say this before, but in a particular experiment, let's say I have three plants, right? Three plants, and they're over by the windowsill. And those three plants, I want to determine the rate of growth based on the amount of water I give it. So I'm going to give all plants the same access to the sunlight. I'm going to give all plants sitting the same height above the ground. They all have the same soil, the same pot. Everything's the same except how much water I'm going to give those plants. All right. So what's the thing in the experiment that I'm going to be changing? In an experiment, we only change one variable. So if everything else is the same except the water, what's the one thing I'm changing? The amount of sun. They're all getting the same sunlight. They're sitting on the windowsill. So if I have the same pot, the same plants, the same soil, the same access to sunlight, same height above the ground, everything's the same. The only thing that's different is the water that I'm giving. I'm going to give one 5 mils, one 10 mils, one 25 milliliters of water per day. what is the thing? What is the one thing? It's called the independent variable, the thing the scientist changes in the experiment. What is that one thing? I just told you. The water.
Or
All right. And because of the water change, what am I going to be measuring? How much it grows. So the height. So every week I'm going to check the height of it and see if it grew anymore, right? So the independent variable is the thing the scientist is changing. Dependent variable is the change that occurs because of what I change, or the measurable, the thing I'm measuring. So I'm measuring the height of the plants, right? So when you guys did the water bottle lab last year, same thing. We did three holes in the water bottle. So the thing I was changing was the hole position, right? And what was I measuring? How fast the water was flowing. Good job. All right. So you all understand what these are. You know what a constant is. What's a constant? By definition of the word, what is a constant? I think Gavin's asleep. What's the constant, Gavin? If I'm going to say that you're consistently tired right now, what is a constant?
me.
You're being the same, right? That means the same. But a control is a control sounds like something I can control. Like it is what I control, but it gets confused sometimes with the word constants. A control is a group of people or a group of something that I'm going to compare my test group to. So over here, I'm testing this group and I'm going to give them all the changes. But over here, I'm going to keep everything the same in this control group and I'm going to compare the change over here. So for the plants, the control group might have been the guy I watered just normally. And then over here, my testing group is the ones I give them a little more water. So I'm going to watch this guy because I know it's going to grow at a consistent rate, but these guys over here might grow a little faster. All right. So our comparison. So that's our lesson on independent variable, dependent variable, experimental design, and scientific method. Hope that was helpful.